You're listening to Scaling Impact, the #1 podcast for conscious entrepreneurs changing the world. Today on the podcast, we're bringing you another foundational knowledge episode. These episodes are designed to give entrepreneurs practical knowledge and actionable steps to scale both their business and their positive impact. In this episode, I'm joined with my co-founder of Exponential Ventures, James Wallace. And since we're both named James, I tend to go by JT and he goes by JW. JW has been an entrepreneur since he was 11 years old and has built hundreds of applications in over 25 tech startups. He built his first website in 1994 and hasn't stopped building technology since. He's an exponential technology specialist and a brilliant advisor when it comes to building exponential organizations. In this episode, we talk about how new technologies like blockchain will begin to decentralize power, shifting it from central authorities and empowering individuals. We also dive deep into the tokenization of the economy and how just about anything from works of art to music rights can be tokenized. We also give some predictions about how in the near future customers will become investors in the products they buy. Interesting points covered include Trustless Systems, how blockchain is shifting the power dynamic toward the individual, the funding gender gap, how women are currently starting companies 2-to-1 over men, but only 3-6% of venture capital funds go to women-led companies, the old false definition of an entrepreneur that stops many from ever starting, and the token economy and what it means for entrepreneurs. Okay, so the reason I wanted to have you here today was to talk about the future. We're both futurists, we hang out with a lot of futurists. We're not under the impression that there is one future. We know that the future depends on the present, and there's multiple myriad futures, everywhere from utopian to dystopian. But let's talk about a little bit more on the utopian side. It doesn't have to be airy-fairy or dreamy, but it's the positive side. And I want to talk about the new founders. So the future of commerce specifically, the business world that we're building startups to be within. That's the context for all the startups that we're working with. So the future of commerce, the future of the founders that are going to run the startups in the future of the founder, the future of the companies, so the startups themselves, and how they're shaped, how they're formed, what they look like, how they're different than they are today, organizational structures, everything like that, anything that you're interested in talking about, as well as the markets that those are in, the markets that are literally being disrupted right now by a number of different technologies or just the times, as well as the context of all of this, which is the new economy. That's something that we always like to talk about, is the new economy, and we feel like we're building these startups within this new economy. Can you talk about that to start off? Just why anything we do has to do with the future of the economy?
I think, post-industrial revolution, when, commerce became a lot simpler, things moved faster, manufacturing was able to produce more items and so on. We saw commerce accelerate greatly, and also kind of a capitalist mindset took over, the world. One of the byproducts of that that's not good for the consumers and the stakeholders and the shareholders and so on is the centralization of everything. And so what we've seen is that with even great intentions, with regulators and watchdogs and government, it created sort of an elite class of people that controlled things. Could be natural resources, could be access to certain markets and so on. So we see as a sort of natural, I think, evolution of technology was the very thing that brought us the constraints and the controls. That sort of technological innovation is now introducing trustless systems that allow for decentralization. And so the thing that we've always known that technology threatens, powers that be, whether that's corporate elites or establishments or governance. In this case, I think that we see that the most significant attack on, the establishment is coming from something that's creating, again, this trustless environment where anyone can trade anything. And so it's literally, whether we like it or not, want it or not, it's creating, the new markets inside the new economy. And what we're having to do is to look at how do we architect companies, so the startups, from a legal, financial, mindset, product development standpoint, to be building their products and services to fit inside the new markets, inside the new economy.
Mm-hmm. And by nature, when you empower the individual, with technology, with new systems, new structures, you disempower the authorities that are over the individual. And I was talking to my wife about that the other day, just in the car, saying like, it's not a fight against, it's a fight for, or it's just by nature of what's happening. People are becoming more empowered. The average person is way more empowered nowadays than back in the day, which means the central authorities are less in power. Yet, when you look at the world and the economy, it seems to not have recognized that yet. And so it's a matter of time before the changes happen, but it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to just happen overnight. But there's emerging technologies. There's different things we can talk about a little bit later, maybe to do with blockchain or the way that is decentralizing, as you're talking about. But can we start off with the founders? So the founders of the future, and how you see them different than, the person that started their own organization, their own company, back when Ford was doing it, or Dale Carnegie, or some of the old school dudes, and only guys. That's the other thing. I think right now there's some amazing stats. There's a big disparity going on with women, where in North America, there's a stat that says that women are creating new companies at a 2-to-1 ratio over men right now. And that's a very powerful stat, especially considering that the venture capital is only giving 3% to 6% of their funding to women-led companies. So there's a huge opportunity, I guess you could say, or problem for women founders that are coming out, or just minority founders of any, like newcomers coming to the country wanting to get started. They're looking for jobs, and there isn't many jobs. And jobs, we can talk about that in the future as well. There's, maybe just to give some context before you go into some of these things in detail, there's 3 studies that have been done for America mostly, but North America, on the future of jobs in reality. And it looks at how many jobs will be deleted, period, from the economy in the next 20 years. And when they were looking at the study, I'm not sure which order these studies came in, but I made up this story in my mind that it went like this. And it was, someone went out and said, we got to figure out how many jobs are going to get deleted from the economy. So a huge firm spent a ton of money to research it, and they came back and they said, it looks like 40%. And everyone's like, that's insane. That's like Greece right now with 40% unemployment. Like that kills economies, that kills whole countries. Like that's what you're talking about for America? No way. You have to go back and do your numbers again. And so it's almost like in disbelief, they commissioned another really thorough study. And the next study came in at 45%. And they were like, what's going on here? And then they commissioned another one. There was another organization that came in, did a giant study, and it came in at 50%. And so the range for the next 20 years is that 40 to 50% of jobs are going to be deleted from the economy in North America. And not all of those are going to be made up with new automation kind of jobs. And that's through automation or just all these different things. But all of a sudden, the economy is going to reconfigure. It's still going to exist. Just jobs are not a great experiment over the last couple hundred years. There's lots of ways to make money. Throughout all of history, we can find guilds, organizations, people that come together, community groups, just people doing things on their own, like merchants, selling their little things or big things, however they are, and then figuring out how to get it to everyone who wants and needs it. And in the old-fashioned marketplace, you had to know the people you were selling them to. Now you have the entire world to be able to connect with. So it's a very different economy, and the borders don't seem to matter as much. The central authorities don't seem to be able to hold back a lot of the opportunity for a lot of people. So with the new founders that come into this, how do you see that playing out? So new founders that are coming, newcomers coming to the country, women-led startups, anyone that's starting a business from scratch, it seems to be the best time in all of history to do this. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely never been easier. I think there's certain qualities in entrepreneurs that are required to affect the change that you want to affect, and to do it in a way that doesn't undermine your own personal sanity and maybe the health and well-being of your family and so on. Having said that, I think that a lot of service providers are stepping up to provide services that entrepreneurs in the near future are going to be able to easily access to offset a lot of those qualities that may have been required in entrepreneurship, even today, but definitely earlier. And you were asking about the Carnegies and the Vanderbilts and the early kind of this is the sort of establishment. These guys are literally household names: Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and And the way that they did business is completely different, obviously, than today. I mean, one stat that I love is that in the late 90s, early 2000s, it would cost about $6 million to launch a startup. And now it's about $14 a month for your baby gator hosting and a domain name. And you can call yourself an agency and begin selling products and services online. It's extraordinary. That doesn't create a successful enterprise, obviously, and this is the part, some of the qualities, grit and determination, adaptability, and so on that are still required. But as we look out the next 5 years and when these jobs being deleted, as that continues to accelerate, the hope, obviously, and I would say the belief, I think that the statistics and the charts show it, are that things will become increasingly easier, hopefully in line with the need, because there's going to be a tremendous need to supplement household income. But I would say, there's never been a better time to be a value creator. So even people that don't identify, I think the identification as an entrepreneur is going to go away. Even there's just, again, like I said,
the word entrepreneur has to become a lot more broad if it doesn't just change drastically.
Yeah, that's why I love the term value creator, because if I have a valuable item, what it takes to build, to even have a system or a framework that allows me to identify a market, then do marketplace validation, product creation, customer development, all of that stuff is really what an entrepreneur, a founder who is an entrepreneur, and not all founders are entrepreneurs, but what is required, that's a lot of friction. To have a human be able to express themselves in some way, create some value, have someone consume that value, and then obviously, exchange some other thing with value. We want to see more value exchange in the world. So I think that value creators in the future, we're going to have more of those and less entrepreneurs.
And a lot of the current business organizations are looking at how to quantify founders, how to quantify entrepreneurs. I've read books that I just I've circled things and said, wrong. This is wrong. Like, it's not true. They're making it way more complex than it needs to be. And one of them was a Gallup book, the polling statistics company. And they were literally saying that they defined entrepreneur in such a way that less than 1%, a fraction of 1% of people could be an entrepreneur or is an ideal entrepreneur. And they were defining it as someone, like they were looking at Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and traditional moguls like that. But they said an entrepreneur has to be able to start a company, scale a company, and manage a company. And I just thought, well, what if you had 3 co-founders? Or what if you had the starter that built it to a certain point and then they got a partner in, or another organization or a funder or something like that, and that was able to help scale it, and they were still in charge. And then maybe there's oftentimes that person can grow enough to be able to manage their own company, but there are people that really are good at managing. And a lot of entrepreneurs that love starting things don't love operations for the next 20 years. So there's people that are real operators that love managing companies. So I just thought, well, what would be the odds of being able to be that entrepreneur? Very, very rare. What would be the odds to be able to find a couple people that can compensate for the areas you're not so strong? So then you have passion, purpose, proficiency, and a few positions in a company, and you just need to connect these people. So then the only problem becomes tribes finding each other, or people that have something really valuable being able to find each other. And that's founders trying to find co-founders, the visionary trying to find the integrator, as Rocket Fuel talks about, Gino Wickman and Mark Winter's book, or just people building and they want to find all the resources that they need. Now we have this open web of interconnectedness that we can find those people. And whether it's customers, every single step of the way, the service providers you want to get, it's all open and available. It's never been that easy. So when you think about founders building these new startups, is there anything else you wanted to say about founders, first of all?
Well, just the comment that you made, to create, scale, and build or manage, I would say that no one has ever been born that can do all 3. And no one will ever be born that can do all 3. And anyone that's represented themselves is not telling the whole story. So they had an entire team around no one can be great at all 3 of those things. And so the only thing I will say is I think that and I think where you're headed right now, the reducing first of all, the need to identify as a holistic anything, right? I am a full, as soon as someone starts to say that, even insinuate that, I get uncomfortable because it's just not true. You're not acknowledging, all the people around you and all the service providers around you and all the little sources of information. There's so many things happening to you and for you at any given time. And I think that the future is reducing the friction and allowing more people to cooperate more often in deeper ways to create, again, like I said, more value.
Yeah, we've made, I remember having discussions with you where we made subgenres of entrepreneurs because you couldn't call these people entrepreneurs. Like it doesn't mean anything. So you were thinking like, what kind of an entrepreneur is this person? And when we'd pass someone over for a conversation or an interview or anything like that, we'd let each other know like what style entrepreneur they are so that you could evaluate them appropriately. Like if I passed over someone, I said, this is an artist. Like this is a certain subgenre of entrepreneur, super creative, amazing ideas, maybe lacking on some of the business skills needed to grow this thing, but they're visionary, they're creative, they've got great ideas, they've got great products that they're developing, maybe they're great at developing products, but as soon as it comes to marketing or getting it to market or getting funding or all these things that businesses often need, they don't have that ability. So then we just need to figure out when they first come in the door, well, what do they have going for them? And then what do they need compensated for in their business model? Because it's not that big of a problem. It's like, having a couple of great advisors might be able to solve a few of those things, hooking them up with a few service providers to solve their marketing challenges and things like that. Say a pay-per-performance marketing firm or something like that, where they could take their stuff and be able to use some Facebook ads or be able to get it to market quick to get some product market fit and then grow it with a marketing firm that would maybe just take a portion of, I think that's the future of the agency model. You've taught me that for the most part, the agency model in marketing collapsing and it going to a real pay-per-performance. I imagine it being like a law firm that you don't pay unless you win. Mm-hmm. And so the company that does the marketing is just betting on their own ability to win, their own ability to do their job, as opposed to being on retainer every month and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really cool options that are coming out that the artist doesn't need to become those people. It doesn't need to necessarily even partner or give away equity to those people. There's resources out there.
And I think, and again, we talk about the new startups inside the new markets, inside the new economy, and what's happening in the background that people aren't talking about is that everything is becoming tokenized. By breaking everything, so you could say that artist entrepreneur, more of an artist than entrepreneur, needs to be an entrepreneur for whatever reason. Maybe there isn't jobs available. Maybe there's no other opportunity in that thing that they're truly proficient, passionate, and purposeful around. What else are they going to do?
It could be making the music, not selling it.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. So if we think about that artist, for example, being like broken into 1 million tokens, the digitization, the tokenization of it, if that person now becomes extremely divisible, they can now obviously exchange that value with others. I know that may sound like an abstract idea, but really what we're trying to do is to allow people and things, products, services, organizations, value creators, value exchange, to become so small and so easily exchangeable that this happens consistently, constantly, and in a way that maximizes the value exchange. So from people to organizations to products to services, to a piece of art on the wall, to commercial property in a downtown area, we are going to create tokenization of all that so that we can transfer it so that not just the energy, but the actual value can be exchanged much quicker to allow people to kind of live in the real world where they have to pay bills and they have to manage their expenses and so on. But that is the new economy, is the tokenization of everything. And then it just allows for massive transfer.
So for people that aren't familiar with tokenization or talk like that, can you talk about digital assets? And obviously there's big constraints with sending stuff from one place to another. All of a sudden you're in the 3D world. The internet broke that in a certain regard, but then just made it really efficient to send stuff that's digital. Over time, as internet speeds got faster and faster, then you could send more stuff digitally that you could otherwise. Now we've almost got more than we know what to do with. If it's a gig per second, ultra high speed broadband in a downtown like Toronto, or Chattanooga, Tennessee, or places like that are making super high speed and attracting international startups and businesses and stuff like that. Because of the infrastructure, no one even quite knows what to do with the infrastructure yet. because there's so much bandwidth to be able to send stuff. So now we have a huge capability, but not any great ideas on how to utilize it fully. Digital assets seems to be one of the ways. Can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, I'll just use the two examples and get into it, I guess, in a little bit more detail. But it can be quite literally whatever you want it to be. And you could take your little Beanie Baby collection and break that into 1 million tokens and sell those tokens or transfer, exchange those tokens with someone else. One of my favorite examples is, again, a piece of art. And there's a Monet currently that someone owns, and they're breaking it into, I think, 10,000 pieces, and they're selling. So you can buy one piece for $100, and now you own a Monet. That is an investment because these things typically increase in value as well. So another really great example is, let's say here in Toronto, I want to get involved in commercial real estate downtown. I would have to go probably form a real estate investment trust, a REIT, raise about $20 million, purchase 5 buildings. My risk is very, very high, and I got to sit on it for 10 years to maybe see it appreciate in value. Alternatively, now we have real estate investment trusts that are operating in the new economy inside this new market and have tokenized themselves and allowed for the exchange as well. So so I can get into downtown Toronto commercial real estate for $75. I can just buy this digitized token, which is equivalent to a share.
If it goes up to 85, you might buy another chunk.
Yeah, Just keep reinvesting. Yeah. But that idea, and obviously there's traditional stock exchanges and there's companies that IPO and you can buy shares and so on, but they're very, 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 very few that we have access to. Mm-hmm. And then there's accredited investor requirements and so on. Quite literally in the future, anyone can tokenize anything and sell it to anyone at any quantity.
That might seem nuts and like totally futuristic, but it's actually the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's very natural. Mm-hmm. It's the way markets grew originally, naturally, which was like there was no middleman in the marketplace. You literally sold stuff to people face to face, one at a time. And then with the internet, it kind of allowed a lot of intermediaries because all of a sudden there was like this infrastructure you had to use. You have to pay your local internet company to let you use the system. You had to then go on to certain websites run by different people. Then you had to send money that would run through another central, kind of authority or intermediary. Then everyone would kind of take a piece of the action along the way. And now the cost of those things has dropped fairly substantially, especially with some of the new options available. But it seems like everything is kind of going back to its natural state, as opposed to going into some strange future. Mm-hmm. When you see the new markets emerging, that these new founders, new companies are going to be in, do you see that marketplace? Like, I don't know if it's fully decentralized or if there's still, I don't think anyone has a problem with a central authority that's providing value and getting a fair amount of money for the value they're providing. Everyone loves that. That's, I think of It's a Wonderful Life, the Christmas movie where there's Potter, that's the guy that's ripping off everyone and no one really likes him. And that's a bad central authority. But then there's the Building and Loan, which is the other guy. And he's the one, he's just like actually supporting people to get their first house and, lending money from this person's equity to this person over here so they can get a house. And like it was a central part of the community was being able to have that role. It's a trusted role. And now if you don't need the trust, then you don't have to pay for that extra trust. You pay for the value. Right? And so if you didn't have to pay for the trust and you just paid for the value, it'd be far less. A good example of that, maybe we can get into some examples like microlending or places that are unbanked in the world right now, where they're paying maybe 60, 70, over 100% interest on the loans that they're able to get because they don't have a lot of collateral and the bank just won't let them have an account. But now they're getting accounts and they're actually paying less fees than I do for my banking. Utilizing some of these new technologies and stuff. So do you have any other examples of that, ways these new markets or new economies, because it's not like we're just switching one day from one economy to the other. Our role in helping these startups is to either create them in such a way that they can be profitable and relevant in both at the same time and slowly merge to the other, or we take one that's fully invested in the old and then migrate them over.
Mm-hmm. It is about trust. And so central authorities, and again, we see it so often, great intentions, and over a period of time, the intention and the commitment to the intention erodes, right? I think the founding fathers of the Constitution of America said about 45 years, expect this to go sideways, and here are a bunch of amendments to hopefully in the Constitution to help you navigate that. So the future is, and again, we make so many assumptions as human beings, and it's largely because we're conditioned, intentionally and unintentionally. But one of the assumptions is the central authority is good. And I would suggest it's not necessarily, but not also that a central authority is necessarily bad. The question is, and so often we don't look at the actual question, the real question is, why do we need a singular central authority? And so the problem is when it becomes singular, like, national currencies, fiat, it's essentially a monopoly. And again, the desire to provide optimal quality, optimal experience, it just naturally over a period of time evaporates. So whenever there is some sort of even kind of positive tension around just competing or ensuring that there's some commitment to maximum value. So again, what I think we're going to see is not that the central authorities go away, not that everything becomes absolutely decentralized, but that we have competing groups of things. So we have some sort of maybe central governance that will probably be significantly limited. But the question is, why can't there be nation state currencies that compete, or just currencies that compete, as an example? So
can I give a funny example of that? I know an investor, I read it in a book. I can't remember which, it was a quite famous investor. And the guy was actually saying the way he invests in companies, he looks for companies that he pays every month that he hates, and he invests in them. And he says, and it's essentially monopolies or oligarchies, where there's so few companies doing what this company does that I have to pay them every month, and I don't like working with them. And I think that that's actually a really good example of the old school economy of what's going on. In the future, there won't be that opportunity much anymore for that company to maybe be abusive to their clients, or just unresponsive, or not providing value, or something going down all the time, like their service not working, or their products breaking or failing. So in the future, they'll just be like, oh, I didn't like that experience, I'm going to go to this one over here. The companies that will thrive will be the ones providing a lot of value, instead of the ones that just are the legacy ones that are the only options, which I think is really good for everyone in the value chain, everyone that's actually providing value. It's really bad for the scammers or anyone that's an intermediary in the middle that's literally not providing any value. Like I'm thinking about maybe an affiliate marketing company that is using bad traffic that's not literally humans, it's robots, clicking on things for people, and they're getting lots of money. You've run across that people have been doing intentionally or unintentionally as companies, young affiliate marketers. There's people out there that aren't actually, they think they're creating more value than they are. And if it was revealed how little it was, they would have to create a new business model, because in the future, things are going to be a little bit more transparent, and you won't be able to hide. I feel like the good services, good people, good products are going to be found out to be really good. And the ones that aren't are going to be found out too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that in the future, as again, we begin to shrink kind of the radius of where we play, so we find smaller and smaller tribes, that will naturally, I think, we begin to feel the responsibility of providing value. The bigger something is, the broader something is, the more participants, it seems to be a degradation. I think we've experienced this in live events. I believe that the future is largely city-states and maybe even community states, where again, we have kind of rule on a smaller level. I think that moving into the future again, we have to look at these small radiuses. If we look at some of the greatest corruptions, the monopolies, oligopolies, and cartels are very closely tied to governments, right? And again, that extinguishes those monopolies, that inability for people to access maximum value really distinguishes all the excitement, all the innovation. Mm-hmm. And again, in the future, we're not trying to, and one thing you taught me was not to focus on the victimizer, but to focus on the victim or a set of different ways to like what is possible. Let's not fight against that thing. Instead, let's imagine the future we want and go create that. I think that we don't need to, I say a lot of this to provide contrast and to be able to look at, how things are. It's easier to imagine the future. But the reality simply is that we need to continue to doing what we're doing, period. We are naturally moving toward this place where we are easily able, as we talked about, for $14 a month, create an enterprise. And then we begin to look at the unique value. We bring people in and just create a much easier medium of exchange. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the future is absolutely the tokenization of everything. I don't know if that answers the question around tokenization or...
Yeah, I'd like to get more into the new economy and into blockchain, actually. So just very specifically, well, what's going on is very near future. I know that you specifically have had lots of international conversations and meetings, and you've been connecting, and I hear about it through your travels, and I've been in some of my own meetings with you. But there's a lot of things going on internationally about like what can be done. So you and I don't love the energy of trying to screw the system. It comes from anger. It was the thing that you just mentioned, the Martin Luther King quote. If you focus on the victimizer or the perpetrator, you'll incite violence. You'll incite riots and Molotov cocktails. If you focus on the victim, you'll incite compassion. And you'll have people actually harness all of that good energy, but instead of throwing stuff, they'll start to use it to build things or to build the new future. So we've been to a bunch of conferences for blockchain and for other types of emerging technologies. And the ones that always resonate most with me are the ones that want to create this optimal future where we can not just disrupt the oppressive and power imbalances, but we can actually build the new future that's irrelevant in. So when it comes to the new economies, is there things you could tell me about the blockchain near future, like if you were to predict in the next 3 years, things that will happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I just want to say about blockchain, just to create, I think, again, a little bit of like perspective and context within the conversation about the new economy, is that it is an extraordinary innovation, but it's just a ledger. It's just a ledger. It's the way that we keep measurement and we manage the exchange in the future. So in the new economy, it is a trustless, public, pseudonymous, incorruptible ledger. It's the way that we manage all this, the tokenization and the massive amounts of exchanging that are happening, again, without some sort of central authority that slows it down, throttles it, charges it, and so on. There's, for great blockchains, very small amounts of a percentage of a cent per transaction.
Well, and people are used to paying really large amounts that they're unaware of. Like say the musician we talked about earlier, they're used to getting on a $20 CD or album or something like that, they're used to getting a small fraction of that money because there's so many intermediaries, from labels to managers to agents and then distribution companies, all the costs incurred of the tangible asset to get a digital copy of a song to a person. And so we've stripped out most of the process. CDs are slowly fading. But that value creator now, when they, I think Imogen Heap created their own blockchain, a small artist, and they wanted to figure out how they could utilize the blockchain just to connect with their customers. And somehow they did it. I'm not sure how it all worked out, but I heard about it. And you can just imagine that artist making a totally different, being able to make a living off their 1,000 true fans. And then now the question is, who can be an artist? If you could actually make a living off of 1,000 fans, like the true fan definition by, was it Kevin Kelly or something? But that just says like you have 1,000 people out there that want to support you. So then, and you look at other types of mediums and what they could do, the person that makes awesome birdhouses that wants to sell them online, how do they get them to the people and eliminate a lot of the costs along the way, or the digital assets? I guess we could stay there instead of the birdhouses. But when you have digital, it opens up a lot of possibility that we've never really seen before. And when you eliminate a lot of the transfer costs or transaction costs or just intermediaries, it's like a new level. It's like the local marketplace, except globally.
Yeah, that's actually a really good example of the songs because I own shares of a startup that's tokenizing songs. And so the idea and this is again a great example, and maybe up until this point, people have been thinking, not really connecting with what can I create and then tokenize, and I'll say it again, anything. And so this song.
So a music lover can invest in the song they love?
Yeah, and there's some now kind of like the new record label are people, and a friend of ours, Matt, bought shares tokens in a Dr. Dre song. So it's not just, it could be the next Bieber on YouTube right now, 12-year-old kid, launch their own song and tokenize the song and maybe get dividends when, you earn money on iTunes, you get royalties on XM radio and so on like that. So again, there's a way to create something of value, tokenize it, 1,000 shares, and the shares are, again, like based on future dividends and so on.
So are you saying that in the future, the customers become investors?
Sure.
Because a lot of people don't identify it.
They become actual stakeholders.
Think of 1,000 people just in our radius right now. How many of them identify as investors? Likely almost none. How many people identify as customers? So there's going to have to be a psychological transfer that happens, or a transition or education that happens. But it seems like money can really make that happen fast. For instance, with the blockchain and currency being the first app on top of the blockchain, it was really helpful that was the first app, because it got a whole bunch of people financially incentivized to make this work. And so it seems like customers becoming investors, they're naturally incentivized, like, oh, I want to buy another album. How can I make money off the one I just bought?
Yeah, and I think that, Exponential Ventures, as you know, obviously we co-created the non-technical investment thesis being to alleviate suffering and expand human potential to enable meaningful living. One of the best ways to do that is to equip everyone with the ability to create value and allow that to be shared, and then again, allowed to be paid for that value. Now, the problem and the question that you asked or alluded to, some storytelling around the travels, and one of the reasons why Exponential Ventures is so dedicated to helping create the new startups for the new markets for the new economy is because the current establishment of corporations, dominant corporations, dominant service providers like banks, they're very critical to operating within business, regulators, so securities laws and so on, and then also just governments, and specifically the Ministry of Finance inside that, again, governs the banks, or doesn't as much as they should. And so we've been spending a lot of time to help people get the right to actually tokenize themselves, tokenize their products, tokenize their services. So right now, through I think a bunch of fear and a lot of, I'd say, a lack of education for all these people, I think the banks understand it better than maybe the various layers of government and other kind of corporate interests. But there's a lot of concern because, again, there is disruption happening. And so a lot of people that are in a very enviable position, in a monopolistic kind of position, obviously don't want to let go of that. So we have found some very interesting, we've talked to heads of state, we've talked to the heads of Ministry of Finance, we've talked to bank presidents, and we've talked to other people, I think stakeholders in the future economy, and everyone is trying as hard as they can to help facilitate, other than the banks, I'll say that one more time, to help facilitate the migration. I think Exponential Ventures.
Well, even the banks, just to be fair to them, Consensus Conference in New York, 3 years ago, there was 300 people at the conference. This year we went, there was 8,000? It only holds 5,000 and there's 8,000 people there, and almost all of them were wearing suits. And the Federal Reserve spoke from stage. There was tons of banks present. So it was actually the whole finance industry in New York that pretty much came out to this blockchain event. So I find it interesting that as much as a lot of the time it seems like they're saying, like, don't talk about that, Bitcoin, that's bad, it's a scam, or something like that. But meanwhile, they have whole departments, they're investing heavily on trying to figure out how to utilize this technology for their own gain. And just strip out a few of the things like transparency and, a few of the features that just they wouldn't want, or that would hurt their business model, their current business model.
What they're trying to do, I think, you're right, and to say it a little bit more directly, they're trying to create their new position in the new economy before they're willing to give up their old one. And so they allow and maintain for this, a lot of pressures and exclusion. And what I was saying earlier about nation states and the nation fiats that are connected to it, really nation states are financial exclusion programs. And I think that they see that and they're very concerned about that. I think that Exponential Ventures, all the investments that we make, if we were to distill it down to one single thing, it's about assisting, the startups of the future and migrating them into the new economy to enable all those wonderful things that we just talked about, the kind of sovereign rights of individuals to create what they want to create and be rewarded in a way that's fair.
Right. And that brings us back to the founders. So it starts with the founder, it ends with the founder, it starts with the individual, I guess, and ends with the individual. And all of those systems, all of the organizations are supposed to be created for the individual, right? There's that, I don't know what this quote is, but it's something about government is created for the people. That's your job. I worked in public sector for 10 years, dedicated as a public servant for the people. I treated public money as if it was my own, because I was like, I'm spending this on behalf of other people. They're paying taxes. Like, it's important stuff. But sometimes the central authorities, after a long period of time, can lose sight of the fact that it's actually not their own money. It's not, they have to be a good steward of it. All these legacy systems, and then they start to make rules and they start to overstep their bounds a little bit, and over time that becomes normal. I'm not a libertarian when it comes to a lot of things, but there's some things where I do find it interesting when I look at my property tax and I'm paying someone else for my property every month or every year, and then they're also telling me what I can't do on my property. And I'm like, okay, well, that seems like there would have been some point in history where they just wanted the money to pay for the roads or pay for the central services we're all sharing. And then there's a point where they're like, well, and we think that you shouldn't pollute the lake because everyone's sharing the lake. Okay, that's reasonable, there's a rule. And then they just keep making more and more rules on top of it. And then it's like, I can't use a 4-inch 2x4, has to be this other type of 2x4. And you start to wonder where the 2x4 company helped lobby for that rule. And then you start to see the exposure of all the central authorities just working together to make the system. Whereas, the bank and the government and the rich folks and maybe a few other central authorities, big companies, all literally, even the people that work at them, cycling back and forth. The guy that runs the bank all of a sudden becomes a government official, or the government official all of a sudden gets leaves his role making the rules and goes and works for one of the largest financial organizations and doesn't even have to come into work for 10 years. It's very interesting how they can switch back and forth from these organizations. But instead of being critical and disheartened, which a lot of our friends that see a lot of they're just aware to what's going on there, it's easy to get dismayed. But what makes you really excited about the future? What's the image or the vision that you have for the future of this?
Well, it's part of the reason why I don't think fighting is the way to go, because it's pointless. And what I mean by that, well, first of all, the fighting in the near term is a waste of energy, but it's pointless in the sense that the centralization and the abuse of authority cannot continue, period. It's inevitable. It is only a matter of time. And I would say that, for those of us out there that feel a little bit overwhelmed with, the current state of affairs, first of all, looking at exponential charts, which is all that you and I look at, things have never been better in every single category that you could possibly measure humanity. But if you're looking at this kind of distorted media version of things and you come to the wrong conclusion that things are actually very bad, the systems of control have never felt more threatened, and they are just fighting to keep their position, whether that's political or, again, financial exclusion or whatever. So, my positive comment on that is that this is inevitable, but what we want are more people to get involved so that we can accelerate this. And when we can get to the point where there's not absolute decentralization, but there's a positive centralization, we will have reduced and maybe even eliminated a lot of suffering. Mm-hmm. So again, the point is not can we make it, will we make it? It's let's get there quicker so less people suffer more.
And one of the things we loved when we were a while back when we were learning about blockchain, about the technology, about all the things that could be done, was that it seemed to have a lot of our core values baked into it, like trust, integrity, privacy at the same time as transparency, all these things that were really valuable to us. And we were thinking, and they're irrevocable? like you could create, because one of the ideas for us is like, what if we invested all this time and energy into a startup that became this huge company, and then they just became exactly like all the ones that we're trying to alleviate people from. But what if it was baked into the protocol? That every user couldn't escape it. Even the new investors that took over the company or something like that couldn't actually change the system unless they got all the customers to agree, or they had to actually backtrack and create a new company to do something else. And then they would just create a less interesting company to compete against it, and that's where I see the banks going a little bit awry, trying to use parts of the blockchain and not the full features. I would bet on the startup bank that uses all the full features of the blockchain 10 times over one against the current company trying to use half of it, because they just have so much more ability. And if you had two options on your plate and one had 10 features and one had 3, you'd always pick the 10 feature one, especially if it was way cheaper. And these eager young startups are going to be where the most abuse is. That's where the most incentive is for people to come and do something, innovate. So I feel like it's a positive tension that's naturally created by the way things are that I think will work out.
And startups are always going to win because they have nothing to lose. And the big companies, the incumbents always feel like there's a lot to lose, so they take very small risks. And like you said, they hide a bunch of the features, and they're playing not to lose rather than playing to win.
Hey, was there anything else? I wanted to wrap it up around there. But anything else, either about the founders, the companies, the markets, the economy, or what we've talked about with the future of business that you wanted to mention?
No, just that blockchain is one of the first, and I would say a major innovation for the new economy, but it's just the accounting software. And what we need is, obviously a lot of people to understand the accounting software, but we need founders to take that software, bring it into new markets and redefine those markets. And we obviously at Exponential Ventures, we just want to support as many people as possible, going into as many different markets as possible to actually reflect back what the tribe members, what the community members actually want.
Right. And we've been to, I don't know how many international conferences on blockchain in different places or on a cryptocurrency or things like that. And we found that there is very few experienced, mature entrepreneurs in these spaces building real companies that provide value, which might seem like just those markers don't seem that strict, but they are. And there's a lot of people trying to make a whole bunch of money. There's a lot of people that are interested in the short-term gain of what they could do there. There's people that are really good-hearted people creating really complex strategies and plans and even software, but there's not even a user for the software yet. So they haven't really launched a business. So we're still looking for these awesome founders that have amazing ideas, that want to create value and execute on it. The execution is the thing that seems to be lacking the most, is that people need to actually build these companies, get them up and running, and see what the market says. So I guess that's what Exponential Ventures is up to in the near future, and looking for all the supports and resources around that. The people in the space that really are dedicated to utilizing this technology for its highest good, and with the high intent toward humanity, whether it's investors, providers, the founders themselves, or just anyone involved in the space that wants to support. We're looking for those people, and they're a little tougher to find than we thought. But there's some great people out there, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that a lot of startups, so it's very exciting when you really understand as a technologist or as a tech startup founder, the implications of blockchain and all the supporting softwares and thinking. I think it's easy to get lost in what does that look like 5 years from now? And I think a lot of people, so my advice to founders and even investors when looking at investments, a lot of founders right now I think are being irresponsible and reckless, understandably, because they're so excited about where we're going. And they're investing now in what they're going to be 5 years from now. And they're calling it, they're building platforms and infrastructure. And I think what would be much smarter is a founder looking at a market opportunity and building a viable business model, and in parallel, building infrastructure. So I think those are the investments that we're looking for.
Because it's the profits from the former that will fund the latter.
Sure. They have a much better, so if the founder is purposeful around that infrastructure in that market 5 years from now, if they're truly purposeful, they'll also find kind of a responsible way of doing that, and that is creating a viable business model. Plus, there won't be as much speculation in the infrastructure because it will be based on consumer feedback, which is obviously much more real than what we might imagine in our dreams.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Fun again.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We take every listener to this podcast very seriously, and we'd love to keep in touch with you directly. So please subscribe to our Scaling Impact community by subscribing to our email list at exv.ai/podcast. That's exv.ai/podcast.